All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of UX Pathways. It's Mark, and I am joined by Thorsten Jonas. How are you today, Thorsten?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge pleasure and an honor to be here at your podcast. Thank you
I
for
am
having me.
so excited. I know we've been talking about joining the podcast for quite some time, and we've crossed paths in many conferences, but I would love for you to tell our audience what is your current role in the industry?
Um, so I quite often call myself a digital sustainability trailblazer. So I'm after I used to work at a digital agency, leading the UX department, all these things. But for some years now, um, I work independent and focus fully on digital sustainability and especially sustainable UX. So how can we make user experience sustainable? What does that mean actually? And as part of this, I have founded together with some other wonderful people some years ago the Sustainable UX Network or SUX Network, as we call it. It's an international initiative, a community. We have a huge Slack space. So it's not a company, it's rather a place and an idea. And yeah, I've dedicated my whole work life to that actually, making digital sustainable, making UX sustainable, and well, these days also talking a lot about AI and the sustainability impacts of AI, which are huge as well.
Oh, yeah, it's changed the world. I mean, we've had it at our fingertips for a while, but it's definitely evolved into something different. And could you just describe the difference between your efforts and, say, like traditional user experience?
Yeah, I think so. When we started, me and others, and there are many other wonderful people going in similar directions. Um, I think one problem with traditional UX is that it's so much focusing on the user. And UX designers always, they even fight for the users, for the user needs and fight against the evil marketing or business people or whatever, right? So there are the business needs, and then somehow as a UX designer, you try to align it with the user needs because we, the UX designers, are the ones who understand the user, and all of our tools are built with the user in the center. But what we forget there is that every experience, every product that we build is never a standalone. It's always part of this world, right? It's always part of a bigger ecosystem, and it affects this ecosystem. It affects other actors, being it other human beings or being it the environment, being it a neighborhood. So let's say, for example, I'm designing the new app for Amazon, the shop, the online shop, right? And I have a great user experience there. And you could say, from a user perspective, it is a great user experience. It's easy to order things, it's super convenient. If something's wrong, I just can send it back. Nobody's asking questions. Um, but other actors are paying the price for this, being it the delivery drivers who are on very tight schedules and cannot make lunch breaks, being it the people working at the fulfillment centers, being at the small shops in our cities that cannot match these business models. And that's something we see very often in user experience. We are focusing so much on the convenience of the user and making things as great as possible for the user that we totally forget about who else is affected. And that's something that people like me actually want to change. We want to see or get to a point where we create our products and experience being balanced with the surrounding ecosystem. That's the goal actually of sustainable UX, or there are many other terms you might have heard of: life-centered design, planet-centered design, humanity-centered design. The core idea is always the same, going away from seeing the user as the center of everything.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that is I love how the idea of an ecosystem, because that is something that I think the general population understands the importance of, environmentalism, but that idea that everything is connected, and I think that does get commonly overlooked. Now, what's interesting is, so you're this is your focus now. How did you land into this industry? Did you start with a different concept in your mind or where you landed now?
Definitely. Maybe not a different concept, but not with this focus. So, many, many years, decades ago, when I went to university, I studied something that was called back then digital media. And that was a little bit of computer science, a little bit of design, a little bit of everything. So I knew a little bit of everything, but I was not good in anything. And then after some years, I joined a digital agency. And on the very first day, on my contract still said I'm a product manager. And on my very first day, they said, "Hey, we are building up a UX department." Or back then they called it information architects. UX department. Do you want to be our first UX designer? And I didn't even really know what that was. I mean, I found out that was exactly what I studied at back at university, and that's how I became a UX designer actually. And so for them, I was there many years. I was the first UX designer building mobile apps, building the first iPhone apps we had in Germany back then, building iPhone apps used by, I don't know, millions of users. I mean, it was the gold rush of mobile app stuff. And from there, coming to the bigger screens, building digital products on all systems, building up the UX department on these agency from me being the first to the full creative department. I don't know, more than 20 people or something. And so that was my classic journey, I would say. And it was a great time. I have been at the agency for many years, more than 10 years, which is quite long for being at an agency. Um, but actually, what changed things for me is that I ran into a burnout 2018. And so I stayed home for 4 or 5 months actually. Actually, as part of my recovery, I did the St. James Way in Spain, the Camino, so these Pilgrims Way, the famous one. And though I returned to the agency after my recovery, I already knew that I won't stay there for so much longer. And I wanted to do something different. I had a feeling of how could I do something more meaningful with what I have learned actually? How can I use that? And so that was something that started to circle in my mind, I would say. And I had these thoughts before, I remember that, but that's what really pushed me, I think, and what also gave me the confidence to just leave the agency world. And I left the agency. Actually, my last months was the months when the COVID pandemic actually fully kicked off in the world. So perfect moment to leave the agency. Still, for me, it was the right moment. And from there, I mean, I gave a lot of talks about my burnout, but I also started giving talks about sustainability in design and responsibility as a designer. And actually, from there, there was never the big master plan. It was rather one thing followed the other. It was um, yeah, it was and still is a journey. And I mentioned the Camino, the Pilgrim's Way, because I think the one thing that I regained there was trusting. In my talks, I sometimes said trusting in the way of life in terms of I do not need to and maybe cannot plan everything, but in the end, everything will be good, right? So this we were in our pre-conversation, we were talking about positive thinking and these things, right? And that's what I regained there, and I think that gave me the confidence to go this journey. And for a few years now, I'm focusing fully on digital sustainability. So this is also that I do to pay my bills. And yeah, I think, today I think I needed the burnout to be able to regain this confidence to do this and to trust um, that it will work. And yeah, so there was no master plan. It was a journey, and one step followed the other, and all that led me to where I am today.
There's a lot in there, Thorsten. I love that trust in the way of life and that positive thinking. What's interesting is that ties right into kind of that sustainability in design. And uh, that's what I think is fascinating is that did a, you took a step back. And I think there's a lot of people out there in their careers when they go down one path, there's that moment where you do a shift. And I've done that with my career as well. You know, I started one way, I hit a different focal point, then I went down another direction, and you start seeing things differently. And that leads me to my next question around, so with the sustainability and design aspect, what does it take to create a positive experience within that? I mean, you talked about understanding different how different things can impact each other. Is there something that you've seen that you've been able to nudge projects in a way to make sure they're positive within your sustainability of design philosophy?
Mm, I think you could say, since you used the word nudging, I think I'm nudging and influencing people all the time in a positive way. And that's something I see when I look at the past years. I do a lot of talks at conferences, also at companies. I do a lot of workshops. So I work a lot with people and I speak a lot to people. And what I see is how important it is actually to do exactly that, to explain, at first, still explain the problem, why it is a problem,
Mm,
and then also provide ideas how people could start to make things better. Because it's never this one thing you do and then you're fine. It's rather starting a process and doing changing one thing after the other. And so that is one thing in terms of, and I think every one of us can be that kind of change, because every conversation we do with another person where we speak about these things makes an impact and is influencing. So, and that is still super, super important. I have never been in a room where the full room after one of my talks said, "Well, nice talk, but we knew everything you already told us." It's just not happening. Though it sometimes for me it feels like, okay, I'm saying similar things again, and it's not because the people are bad. It's human that they have so many things in mind, and me and others, we need to help them to start this process of making digital more sustainable, of explaining the impacts of things. And I think you can do the same in user experience. One important aspect is also to make negative impacts visible to users, and sometimes make explain users, why is this website bad for the environment? What's the carbon impact of this website? Nowadays, you can, well, it's not a 100% exact measurement, but it's pretty good. And you can do that pretty easy. There are nice tools. And you can explain that to users as well. You can, if users have different options to choose from, right? So you could make the most sustainable option just the default option. So you do not take anything away. You just nudge the user a little bit by saying, okay, let's say, I don't know, we had the Amazon example, ordering something at an online shop. And so living in a big city, I'm living in Hamburg, Germany, which is a big city. And the most sustainable delivery option for parcels is not delivery to my home door, but to a hub nearby, which is in 5 minutes walking distance. So why isn't that the default option in, for example, in a shop when I order something? So, and this is just one example. There are many small things that you can do, being it nudging the user, making sustainability part of the journey of the user, explaining that, especially since, I mean, users, people want to buy sustainable products, and I'm convinced they want to buy sustainable digital experiences. So it's already a business factor, um, as well. And so that's one thing, creating the transparency, nudging them a little bit. But there are also tons of things you can do behind the curtain that the user might not even see, and that make the whole experience more sustainable. So yeah, there is that's the good thing. There are many things we could do that all make an impact, and that's the important thing, to very often pick the one thing, the easiest thing to do first, and from there do the next thing. And again, that's also again important to explain to the people building the digital products, that it's so easy to start, that it's not the big Mount Everest that they have to climb, but it's just one step. And then there is maybe another step.
So it sounds like the education of it, making sure people understand that the impact of it, and then also that you can do it incrementally. You can
Yeah.
work at these things step by step, and that will allow you to move it forward. And you did say something in there about that understanding or explaining the problem. And I think when you say you are speaking to everyone and you feel as though you're repeating yourself, that philosophy, this new philosophy that you've been working on, the sustainability and design, I could see why those trying to understand how to implement it could be challenging. From your perspective, is there something outside of some of the things you've already said to get someone to understand how to implement it, to get over if they're at an organization, how can they implement it? Is it just the making sure the default is the sustainable option, or are there other things they can do internally so that as a to the business they understand the value of that too?
That's you said the important word at the very end. It's finding the business narrative. Unfortunately, that is still um, super necessary to explain that this is because the main narrative still is okay, yeah, we should act more sustainable, but it's a cost factor. Truth is, it's not true. It is, sustainability is already a business factor from different angles. So, um, just a simple example, if I have a website, and so usually if I make the website less carbon heavy, that means the website itself will get lighter. So less data needs to be stored, less data needs to be transported. And having less data means I need less servers to store all this stuff. Means so if I compress my images in a better way, then I need less server capacity. So I will save money. And we all know how expensive Amazon servers are, for example. And so that is a business factor. Then there is huge consulting companies. There's a Capgemini study from 2022, I think, where they say so they were looking at sustainable product design, and their finding was that well, it's not good only good to save the planet, but it's also good or has a massive potential for more for revenue growth. Actually, has a massive potential for a better relationship to your customers because people want to buy greener products and people are not dumb. Maybe today it's still enough to paint your stuff green. In 2 years, it won't be enough anymore. And people will see that. So that's a business factor. And it's also um, for the relationship to your employees because people want to work at sustainable companies and especially for big companies looking for highly trained special people, that is a factor for these people if they want to work at a company. And then, especially here in Europe, in the EU, regulation is also a huge factor. We have something called the New Green Deal here. And so digital emissions will be a factor. Because so far in sustainability reporting, digital emissions are not so important. People focusing on scope one emissions and digital emissions, it's not really clear where they are. Usually they are in scope three. So that was not for these classic reporting guys, not important. But that is changing with what's happening here in the EU at the moment. So there will be also pressure from the regulation side. And that's also a business factor. So these narrative in terms of sustainability is I sometimes say it's not only an obligation, it's also an opportunity. And I would even go beyond and say, hey, you should start thinking about that now because if you do not, that could be a problem in 3 to 5 years for your business. And we still need to carry these narratives into the organization. And we need to have these examples, like with the server example, saying, hey, you could save money. IT people love that, actually,
Oh,
right? They
yes,
are the
they
best
do.
friends of the designers in that. And so, speaking about narratives, what I see, this is a super interesting and important topic, even on a higher level. So going beyond the products and the companies, because And I think this is really interesting. We always talk so much about data, right? And that we are a data-driven world, et cetera, et cetera. But if we are really honest, we are driven by stories, by narratives. That's why these extreme politicians and parties get into power. That's right. I mean, we have an election here in Germany in 2 weeks, and there is a massive fight for getting the Nazi party as low as possible because they have way too much votes. And so this whole narrative thing is not only something for us in our product and company world, it's even going beyond. And I think we as designers by nature are storytellers. A user journey is a story. A designer creating an image is always a story. And so that's also something we need to use these capabilities to tell better stories, being it to other stakeholders, but also being it to the world out there. So getting back to your question, yeah, it's not only about the tactical things we can do on the product level, it's also going beyond. It's also finding the right narratives for the right stakeholders, for the right people. And that is super important, and maybe even more important and the biggest challenge we see these days.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack in there, Thorsten, but some of the things that you hit on, every company is going to struggle with. And that's, when you're thinking getting into this career, you have to think about all those business aspects, which you've totally outlined there. And that leads me to my next question is if someone is thinking about getting into this industry, and especially with the, I guess, umbrella of sustainability in design, keeping that in mind, you mentioned artificial intelligence, you mentioned all these other technologies. What advice do you have for people that are looking to get into this industry?
Um, it's it's a journey. It's I think I said that before. It's like the
Hmm.
product that I need to do better day by day. It's also the journey that goes on day by day, step by step. That's how it worked for me. And as I said, things were not planned. I did not have the master plan. It was rather doing one talk and then another talk followed out of that. And that's something I see sustainability, and I assume not only in the digital world, but everywhere, is still a very personal thing. So it's about personal connections. It's having a connection to someone in a company somewhere, and that opens you the doors. And that works pretty well, I can tell. I mean, I have met so in almost every company are really wonderful people that want to hardly want to drive sustainability. And it's about finding these people and helping them actually to address that in their company, helping them to find the right arguments for their stakeholders. And that also opens the opportunities for yourself and for doing a talk or a workshop. Or I do a lot of courses, for example. I do master classes not only for individual designers, but also for design and product teams and companies. And that works pretty well, which is good for me because it means I can pay my bills. And also is super positive because it means there is someone who is in charge of budgets who thinks it's a good idea that a person like me comes to the company and gives this half-day course, right? And this is a momentum shift that is that is great. So the overall momentum shift is there, but it is still a fight that we are fighting right now, actually, because of what we see on political levels, right? What's happening there? So it's not self-running. It's still hard work, and it's about speaking with people, meeting new people, spreading the message. But it always pays off. Everything that everything that I did in the past, I don't know, 5 years, at some point later made sense, right? There's these, and I'm not a big fan of Steve Jobs, right? But there is this famous speech of connecting the dots thing. And yes, I experienced that as well. I do things and they always um, pay off. Try to do the right thing, be kind to people, and find a way to um, explain the problems and the negative impacts, but also show opportunities how to tackle that. And that works pretty well. It's a journey. It's sometimes hard, but I think time is on our side, and it's rather about how can we speed up things. And but the momentum shift is still there, though it's so challenging times.
Great advice. Just keep pushing forward, try to stay positive. That journey we talked about as well. I heard stories in there earlier. And so you talked about this movement that you're on. Where can more people find out more information about it? And how can everyone out there follow your passion?
Yeah, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy if you have questions, want to discuss anything, just ping me. I'm always happy to talk about things. Um, Come to the Sustainable UX Network. It's just sustainableuxnetwork.com. There you will find the link to our Slack space where we have, I don't know, 2,500 people in the Slack space. You will find the link to our podcast where I actually sit down with wonderful people from around the world talking about not only sustainable design but digital sustainability in general, um, talking about the resource impacts of digital, of AI. And we have a huge resource database for free where we share all kinds of resources from all kinds of wonderful people from around the world. So we collect that. You can find that as sorted by design phases. And yeah, we do online meetings. We start local chapters at the moment. So come to sustainableuxnetwork.com and you will find everything. You do not have to buy anything. Um, Everything we do is for free. Only the courses, actually, the master classes, they are not for free, but everything else is there. So join us there. Just take resources that are helpful for you, and yeah, get in touch because getting together is still so super important. There are so many great people out there, and it's important for us to um, to get together, to join forces actually, because that's how we make a huge impact.
Well, I've been a fan of your work and I appreciate you being on the podcast. And I definitely recommend everyone to follow what Thorsten is working on out there. And I appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure, a huge honor. Really enjoyed it.